Well, good afternoon, Sarah. How are you?
I'm good. We're both wearing yellow today.
Oh my gosh, we are
Isn't that funny?
matching.
I know. Now we're really getting carried away.
Yeah, so oh yeah, now we're really getting carried
Now
away.
we're extra.
Before we were not carried away. So I have to tell you, I woke up in the middle of the night, just spinning on the things that we do. And I was like, oh, you know what? I know where my old pictures are. I should go grab a picture. But then I totally forgot how to do that. So did you bring a picture today?
You know what? I didn't but my excuse is we had no power for the last,
Oh,
we lost power. There was a storm in the area earlier this week. And so we lost power. And my neighborhood was uniquely affected. So I did not have an opportunity because we have some limited power. We're unfortunate we have a generator that helps, sort of preserve our air conditioning and our refrigerator. But no, I didn't have a chance to. But the truth is, our topic this week, which is how to quit something well, I was also thinking, like, what could I possibly bring as a picture? Because the picture, I started to think, like, what's something that I could show that Robin and I both quit. The only thing I could think of is we quit making our own Halloween costumes. And there is a picture, and I will find it, of you and I I think in maybe it might have been seventh grade, and we came up. I'm pretty sure it was your idea because again, going back to first episode, I'm not creative intuitively. Some Halloween costume that was a combination of found items. Let's just say that.
yeah. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Well, that's a good one. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think finding things that we quit together would be probably tricky, but I have a
Yeah.
whole bunch of things that I've quit personally. And
Mm.
so I've been really looking forward to this because it is something that comes up so often in in conversations with friends, with my coaching clients, because we can have a lot of anxiety or worry or anticipating some regret around quitting something. Just doesn't it seem like the word quit just has such a negative connotation to it?
Yeah, because I think people think of the word quit as a giving up.
Hmm.
So it's almost like, if you quit, you gave up.
Right.
And I think that's where it comes from. It's the idea of abandoning something or giving it up. And it's almost sort of makes you think of doing it in haste or doing it without thought, or almost impulsively. So, yeah, we have to think of a better word for quit.
Yeah.
How about
Well, I
gent?
have
How
one and
about
I can't wait to
gently?
share it, but it's not yet.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, like, gently depart.
Yeah. Turning the page.
Right.
Yeah.
Softly exit. I don't
Right.
know.
Right. Well,
Right.
so I have a whole bunch of stuff that I have quit as some examples. What's something that comes to mind for you? Something that you have quit?
It's funny when I was talking with my husband, I was telling him about our topic, and I said, "Can you think of something that you've quit or I've quit?" And maybe I think this sort of it's hard for me to answer because I think number one, I'm stubborn enough to not quit many things, right? And so I sort of will persist, but I'm also similarly not necessarily as sort of open to trying so many new things that I have too many options of things to quit, right? And so I think, um, a lot of the things I've quit are sort of more intangible. So I'm not talking about like jobs, or even quitting on, relationships. Sometimes we have to walk away from relationships or, I stopped working out because I had a bad workout at the gym or something like that. I think when I think of quitting or I think of maybe walking away, it's maybe around commitments that I've made, some of which I have never even stated to anyone, and I've just
Mhm.
decided. So, for example, the thing that came to mind was a very simple one, which is I've quit the idea that I'm going to be a person who reads before bed. Okay.
Okay.
This is the I want to be this person who reads regularly. And I'm
Hmm.
now become the person who reads when I go on vacation. That's it. And so
Great.
my Kindle sits next to my bed. It's like a suggestion,
Yeah.
like pick me up.
I'm here. I'm here. Yeah.
I sort of I've quit holding myself to this sort of impossible standard because the reality is I get in bed at night, I'm exhausted. My eyes are open for a good 15 minutes. So I've quit pretending that I'm going to be the person who reads before I go to bed.
Yeah, I love that. So, because I think you're talking about there's probably a couple different buckets of things that we might quit. So there's
Right.
certainly things that we're actively doing and then we stop. So it falls into that category of quit. I think it also, and maybe something where people get a little bit more hung up on it, and in the example that you're giving is that you have this goal or an aspiration of something that you want, and then you kind of quit in pursuit of a goal. So you haven't quite achieved it yet. It's not like you were, maybe at least recently, a before bed reader that then you quit because it was eating into your sleep or whatever. You were just,
Mhm.
you were trying to be that person and then you quit trying.
Right, right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, what's interesting, I don't know if you've ever read Angela Duckworth's book,
Yeah, I'm grit.
right? And she talks about grit. And I sort of think about grit when I think about this idea of quitting. And what's interesting is, she talks about that successful people quit things that no longer serve larger goals, right? And so she said, what I love that she says, people quit the strategy, not the aspiration. And I love that because to me, it sort of made me feel better, which is like, I still aspire to be someone who reads a lot. I want to be well read. I want to be informed. I want to sort of, be taken away by a beautiful story. I love to read and I love stories, but I've quit the strategy of
Mhm.
doing that before I go to bed. Right. And
Right.
so I think that's really another way of thinking about it, which is you don't have to completely walk away from the pursuit, but the strategy you've picked might not be the right one to get there. And you're allowed to quit strategies.
Yeah. Well, and the great news is that we're really allowed to quit anything we want because
Yeah.
most of the people, I would say all of the people, maybe except for your precious daughter Lark, are adults here. We're grown-ass adults and we can really quit whatever we want. And but it does but it can be fraught, with these, giving up some identity or some pursuit of a goal or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I do think what Angela's talking about, that, quitting that strategy, that is sometimes that I think like, well, I still want this, but like how I'm approaching it isn't really working. Is there an easier way to go about this? And that can be a way to still not quit the goal, but quit your approach or quit the strategy.
But let me ask you something because
Yeah.
there's also this research on something called sunk cost bias. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So sunk cost bias is this idea of like, well, I've already invested and they fill in the blank 5 years learning how to do this, or I've already spent so much money, or I've put so much into this, and that the bias that stops you from quitting something that you don't want to do or isn't working is that sort of historical investment. And I'm curious your thoughts about this as it relates to kids because I have found like I will tell you the funniest story. So, I've shared before with people who follow me and maybe read my newsletter that both of my daughters are in two very different but high investment competitive endeavors. One is an equestrian and one is a competitive dancer. And so one time I remember my husband got very frustrated with my younger daughter and his consequence was to take away her going to dance. Okay? Like let's say, and I was like, I wait a minute. Like, do you know how much money we like? That's not a consequence. Like, we've spent so much money. Like, that can't be the thing we take away from her. But I also think about this in terms of like quitting, like, and your kids are in competitive sports, and one of your daughters is a very successful soccer player. I mean, if they wanted to sort of quit or take a like, what would be your thoughts around that when you've sort of already invested so much time and money? What do you think about that idea?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a good way to, I don't think I've thought about it in terms of kids plus the sunk cost fallacy. I will say that last spring, my son, my youngest child, was contemplating stopping soccer. And I did have feelings about it. I did not share them with him, but I felt some resistance. And I talked privately to my husband about it, like exploring, like, what is this? Like, why am I feeling so much resistance to him quitting soccer? I don't know if it was quite sunk cost fallacy. It's kind of more like uncertainty about what he was going to do instead, maybe some worry about him, not being as active or something like that. But I do think that sunk cost does get us in trouble sometimes because it's very real. I mean, once you've invested your time and your money, it does, but you have not yet reached whatever goal you're pursuing. It can be very difficult to give that up and feel like all of that effort was wasted.
Well, and I do think in some ways this is good, right? There's an insulating factor to being reluctant to quit something you put a lot of time into. Because some of the hardest and yet most meaningful pursuits I've ever engaged in, at least professionally, I thought about quitting more than once. And so one of the things that comes to mind is earning my PhD.
Mhm.
And I remember wanting to quit that pursuit more than once. And part of what prevented me from doing it was like, hey, I'm already 3 years in. I've spent all this time, all this money, given up so much of my personal life. Like, I can't walk away now. Like, I've already sunk in so much into this. And at the end of the day, like, I'm glad that that sort of was a constraining factor because I'm grateful for what I learned from that. And of course, what having a doctorate has sort of done for me, not only intellectually, but in terms of my career. So to some extent, I like that. I feel like it can give like an insulating factor to
Mhm.
preventing you from quitting. But the truth is, I think we have to sort of also talk about why we quit things, because I think we quit them for three reasons. We either are finished with it, it's the wrong thing, or we've outgrown it. And so I think the reasons we quit also matter just as much as the quitting itself.
Yeah, yeah, and I see a commonality in those three categories that you just said, and it can get hard when we're unclear why we are doing this to begin with, or why are we pursuing this thing at all? When we lose touch with that why we even started it, and it doesn't seem to fit our kind of what the directions our life is taken, that can be a good indicator that it's a good time to examine it. Is this still in alignment with what I want? And there are so many people, and I've definitely been in this category myself, where I keep going because I don't want to have this identity as somebody who quits, like a quitter.
Right.
But really, it's just, I've taken on different interests. My life has evolved, and I'm no longer really interested in that thing. So, over the last couple of years, I've been doing triathlons recreationally. As part of that, had joined a club, and on two different occasions, I faced this choice of quitting the club. And the reasons were that I had completed my goals, and I really didn't have the time, but there was some pressure both from the coach, that community, and from myself, like kind of giving up that connection. But there was a significant financial investment that came with it that helped me kind of balance that out. So I have like quit that. That's an example of something I quit twice. But I will say that one thing that helped me do that, not only just because I didn't have to pay for it anymore, which is a benefit, is that quitting something well, to your kind of the way you kick this off, exit. I felt like I was able to exit that group in a way that didn't burn any bridges, and
Yeah.
to be welcomed back. So the next time I feel like, oh, hey, here's a big race I want to train for, and I would be part of this group again, I can just restart. So I think that's one category to really look at. How can you do an exit gracefully so that if you change your mind in the future, it's easy to get that on ramp and get back into it.
Yeah. Well, and I try to use this framework when I'm talking with people about making like sort of decisions when you sort of are in a fork in the road or trying to say, pause, evaluate, and then decide. Because, first of all, I always say, and I've shared this before, you shouldn't always try to pause. Like you shouldn't quit anything in the heat of emotion. And I don't mean emotion in always like a negative way. It doesn't have to be like that you're angry. Of course, if you're angry or frustrated, that's never a good time to make, big decisions. I always say big emotions shouldn't lead to big decisions. But it could also be like if your emotions are around being exhausted or embarrassed. I mean, I'm the first one like when I feel overwhelmed to be like, I want to stop doing and fill in the blank. And it could be whatever is making me feel exhausted in that moment. Maybe it's an additional job responsibility I've taken on, or, I was like, I want to quit making dinner. Like,
Yeah,
it's just like, that they meme on Instagram that says like the most adult thing is the fact that you have to figure out what's for dinner every day for the rest of your life.
right,
Like, so
right.
when I'm frustrated, I'm like, okay, I can't quit making dinner. But, most quitting decisions happen when we have high emotion. So I think rarely do we make our best decisions in those moments. So I think pausing is a super important part of sort of making these big decisions. And you talked about quitting a team. Was it the same team twice or two different
No,
teams?
no, I quit them twice. Yes.
Yeah, you couldn't have twice. So, I mean, the thing it reminds me of is when we were deciding to change competitive dance studios for my
Mhm.
younger daughter. And, it was like writing that text message or making that phone call and talking to the director and sort of saying we're leaving, was really hard. But it was the culmination of a lot of thoughtful thing. And so I always say it's like, it's not the leaving or the quitting that's the hard part. It's the communicating it and it's saying and sort of like putting it out there. So sometimes we make the decision up here before we typically articulate. You probably decided to quit those teams before you told them. But, it's like I always say, don't resign after you've had a terrible meeting or just because you didn't get a job that you wanted. And, don't end a friendship just because you've had one disagreement. And, you don't, like I said earlier, you don't quit cooking dinner just because you burn the steak. So I think just sort of being thoughtful and pausing is a really important part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. But does it seem like the fantasy of just on a bad day saying like you could take this job and shove it, like that is so
We do
like
have people who do that.
we'll never do that. But
Yeah.
oh, there's just something like that's so delicious about the idea of it. So I love the idea of pausing. Yes, you absolutely, at a minimum, I mean, depending on the magnitude of the decision, but at a minimum, give yourself 24 hours to settle back to neutral and then
Right.
use some kind of systematic way, whatever works for you, to really evaluate, does this align with my long-term goals? Does it fit my life in terms of time? Is there a way to restart this in the future when there's more resources available? Whatever it is. So just getting realistic. But here's the thing that I encounter a lot, and I don't know if you've ever experienced this, is that sometimes we lie to ourselves about the reasons. And
Mm,
I think this is a problem because when I could have said, I mean, like a couple of things that felt true, and just kind of going back to the triathlon club as an example, like it was too expensive, I didn't have time, and I had all
mm.
of these things. But the reality is, I was just done with it. I didn't want to. Like I did not want to do it anymore. And so getting really, really honest with yourself. And that doesn't necessarily mean that's what you have to broadcast out to to everybody, but really, really honest with yourself about your reasons, like your reasons, and then move forward. Because when we kind of make up all of these stories and these excuses about why we want to quit something, we kind of like call bullshit on ourselves. Like at
Yeah.
some point in the future, like that wasn't really true. And we can erode some of the trust we have in ourselves if you lie to yourself and then you buy into your own story for a little bit, because ultimately kind of you were not totally
Yeah.
honest.
Well, and I think what you've said sort of reminds me is like after you pause, you have to ask yourself some better questions, right? Because, are you making this decision to quit because it's just hard, or is it, are you uncomfortable? Is the thing making you better or getting you closer to who you're trying to become? When I think about, working on my doctorate, it's like, yeah, it's hard, but it's getting me closer to this thing that I want to do. And so that's certainly not a reason to quit. Or, is this just not aligned to what I want to do anymore? How I want to spend my time? I find that particularly because of my personality, people automatically assume I want to be in charge of anything I'm involved with. Now, and and that might be sort of true perhaps to some extent. I do like to be in control. I will acknowledge that. But interestingly, what people are surprised about me is that in my personal life, I really, particularly in like my kids' activities and the different teams they're on, and every team has a group chat and every sort of person takes a different role. I really prefer to stand back. I'm not the person to say, let me coordinate this and let me do that. I'm good at organizing things and I'm good at sharing information and stuff, but I don't want to actually do it. And I committed last year for one of my daughter's activities to sort of take on a bigger role. Part of it was because I was like, oh, well, they asked me. And I honestly, I haven't really done much.
Right.
I've just been like
Sense of
dropping off.
obligation. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
And now I feel a bit stuck
Right.
because I don't really want to do it. It's not, it's, and so I think it's also this idea of like, why did I say yes then? What has changed for me now? Is it, and that all of the reasons I might answer those questions I'm asking of myself are okay. I think sometimes your point is like, I think we're ashamed to say the truth is like, I don't want to do this anymore because it doesn't interest me,
I just don't
or
want
I'm
to.
tired, or I
Yeah.
don't care enough about it, or whatever it might be. And like, those are okay. I always, you can have any reason. It doesn't have to, it's like good reason, no bad reason, or no reason at all. They're all a reason.
Right. Right, right, right. Well, and that, so it's interesting. So we can quit things as a way to get ourselves out of something we obligated ourselves to in the
Right.
past. So, I mean, like totally legitimate. And in your particular case, knowing the background on that story, it led to a situation at Costco that you would probably
Oh God.
not love to repeat anytime soon.
Yes. Yeah, so if anybody would like to know, I did not, so I am like one of the only people perhaps left on the planet who has gotten through my adult life without having a membership to Costco.
I don't have one either, but yeah, so this was news to me.
Right. I did not have a membership to Costco, but I volunteered to coordinate concessions for one of my daughter's teams that involved going to Costco, which seemed like a simple enough endeavor. So I did, join Costco and go to Costco. And I was like, I was on fire. I had my list. I loaded up my cart. I go to the front. I did not know that Costco only accepts Visa as their official credit card. I do not have a Visa. I have a MasterCard and had to embarrassingly leave everything at the front. So it's sort of right. It was like, this is a sign why I should not be in charge of this. Like I couldn't even, anyway, I ended up figuring it out. But my point is also that you sometimes it's like, see, I shouldn't have done this. This is why this is going sideways.
Right,
I'm not cut out for
right.
this.
I
Yeah.
still think about this time, and we definitely don't want to say a name here, but you told me a story about someone you knew who said, as she was to herself, as she was walking down the aisle at her own wedding,
Oh,
I
yes.
knew I was making a mistake, or something like that,
Yes,
right?
it was one of my former teammates back in the day. This is like more than 25 years ago, who was, was divorced in her 20s, like so young, because I was in my 20s at the time. And she said, I was walking down the aisle and I knew we weren't going to make it. And I'm,
Wow, wow. Yeah,
wow, it still kept
yeah.
going.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it would take a lot. You hear about those stories sometimes where
Yeah,
people don't turn out to their own wedding or something dramatic happens. But so often that's what we do. We're kind of like caught up in the whole thing, and
right.
those little voices that are saying like, "Wait a second, wait," prevent us from making the choice that's in our best interest. So
Yeah.
so I have, kind of like one thing is so a lot of what comes up with my clients, we talk a lot about because I mostly work with mid-career people who are facing these choices about kind of what to do next. We've talked about this before. And so one thing that'll come up is like, well, when do I quit? Like, how do I quit this job? And or should I quit this job? Should I really go to pursue this other thing? And one thing that I think can be really helpful if you are on the fence and you honestly do not know, you're really grappling with this tough decision about whether to quit something or not, is especially when it comes to work or it comes to a relationship, maybe when it comes to your home, is find a way to love it before you leave it.
I love that. Well,
And yeah, go
I
ahead.
that what you said is I always tell people you don't have to rewrite history to justify your decision to leave a job. You also don't have to vilify your experience to justify your decision. And I always tell people, having left a job that I was, loved and was invested in after more than 23 years in it, that I was not running away from one job. You shouldn't try to just, you're not trying to escape something. I was running toward something else. I was choosing
Yeah,
to, and that required me to walk away. And I think sometimes, I think it's okay. People think that if you quit, it was bad. And I always say you can actually leave something good. And I
a
think we have
thousand
to sort of
percent.
also
Yeah,
bring that in because I think a lot of people, to your point about quitting is bad. Like if you say I quit my job, people think you left it because the job was bad, the organization was bad. And
yeah.
I
Oh, you must have had a terrible boss. It must have been, ugh. Yeah.
now interestingly about that, there's a lot of research that say people quit bosses before they quit jobs.
Oh,
So
for sure. Yeah.
So I'd actually, I mean, that's a whole thing, right? That is an actual thing. But I think, you can also say like this just isn't right for me anymore. And
Yeah.
I want to walk towards something new. And I love where I've been, but the place was in is what has created this opportunity for me to do something new as well. And so, I think
Yeah.
to say,
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, and having people just reminding yourself that, to double check that you are moving towards something that is more aligned with your goals and not just getting yourself out of situation. And and I think the action of trying to figure out how to love it before you leave it really prompts us to examine what is my role here? in this situation? Like, are there, because there are always things that we can do, always things within our power to change our environment. And the problem that I think sometimes people run into is that they'll have a situation they don't quite like at work, they don't get along with their coworkers, they don't like their boss, the whole thing. And then they go ahead and quit and get a new job, and the pattern repeats. And they're surprised. And none of us should be surprised because we bring ourselves with us.
Yeah, right,
And
exactly.
so really looking at all of those as growth opportunities, that if you're uncomfortable in a role right now or you don't really quite like it, or a relationship, assuming that you're safe, really look at ways that you can make it better, like what's within your power, because you'll always grow from that experience. Even if once you get to love it, you still decide to leave it, that's totally fine. But there's like an embedded growth, an opportunity for growth there that I don't want anyone to miss.
Yeah, and I think we would always sort of put an asterisk here, right? Like we would never encourage anyone to stay in an abusive or toxic
Right.
relationship in work or life, right? So sort of pulling those outliers out, right? So if anyone's experiencing bullying, harassment, intimidation, abuse, all of those things aside, yes, we quit, we walk away, we run, you do all the things. I think what we're really trying to focus on though is this sort of idea of the space where it no longer meets my needs. I'm no longer satisfied, or I don't feel valued, or whatever it might be. And, sort of, I think a lot of times we try to somewhat see the experience through a distorted lens to sort of help ourselves feel strength in the decision we've made. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to burn a bridge, but even bigger than that, you don't have to describe where you were as bad in order to choose something different for yourself. And I think that's important, absent, of course, the outliers where things really are bad, and you definitely need to leave.
Yeah, for sure. So in a couple of previous episodes, we've talked about identity. And I think that is a piece here, because when we're quitting something, depending on how the magnitude of it, it can be shifting part of our identity. Like, for example, kind of going back to the thing about the triathlon club, am I still a person that does triathlons, even though I'm not actively doing any, I don't have any on my calendar this year, and I'm not a part of the club, I'm not doing any of that training. Like, is that still a part of my identity? And so when things are so embedded in, like, and to your point, like, I'm a person that reads before bed, acknowledging that there is an aspect here of our identity that that can influence our willingness to kind of make that decision whether to stop something or not.
Well, and listen, what you said reminds me. I wrote a newsletter a number of weeks ago or more about how the feelings, the complicated feelings I had when we were leaving the dance studio. And one of the things I shared with another mom was that I had to acknowledge that there were things that were bothering me was I didn't want to be the person that everybody said, see, they left. It was sort of
Mhm.
like I was focused on this idea that perhaps it was going to change how others saw us. Somehow we
Yeah.
were we were less loyal, we were less, whatever. And then, someone said to me, like, you didn't sign a lifetime commitment
Right.
like
Right.
to the dance studio. And
Right.
what I said was, but the experience was challenging the story that I told about myself, because one of the things I believe about myself is that I'm very loyal, that I'm also like I'm a stayer. I mean, the longevity of our friendship is sort of the greatest manifestation of that, right? Like if
Mhm.
you get me, like if I'm in your circle, you
Oh,
better get
locked in.
you better
You are
get used
locked
to
in.
seeing
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Because you're stuck with me for life. You can't get rid of me,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
So
and
my
thankfully in my case,
Right.
yeah.
But what I'm saying is sort of like, so for me to be a leaver, a quitter, whatever it is, I was worried that it challenged not only how I think about myself, but how others were going to see me. And that was a factor. That was, it didn't change the decision, but it was sort of something that I worried about, and something that I realized, and I felt like that was the harder part of it. It wasn't the actual leaving.
Yeah.
And recently, I've been starting to share, on my personal social media, just some videos of my daughter's new studio experience. And another mother reached out to me, and she said, of the former studio, and she said, "Oh my gosh, I love seeing her thrive, and I love seeing her flourish." And I was like, I remember thinking to myself, "Oh, thank God,"
Yeah.
they're not mad at me. And I was like, mad at me for what?
Yeah.
I didn't do anything wrong. I made a choice for our family. And so I think that what you said really resonates with me.
Yeah, but I mean, you're also super sensitive, and there are just some cultural dynamics, and especially like among women, among moms, that
Right.
that we're all just super sensitive to. So it doesn't surprise me at all that you were thinking through those things. But it is, I'm glad that this other mom reached out and could help put it in perspective.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So true.
Well, so let me talk about something on the flip side of this. So when I was in high school and in college, I smoked Marlboro Lights, and
Yeah.
not like on a. Well, so here's the thing. I'm already like starting to put all these caveats on it, but it
Call
was
you a, I would sort of call it a casual,
like a social smoker.
it's like a casual consumer of nicotine. It was like in very limited situations, I might find you with a
Well,
cigarette.
right. But I would say like those limited situations usually like would be a cigarette and a glass of wine or something. But then when you have wine on a daily basis, then like anyway.
Oh, yeah,
And I
fair
would go
point.
to like my annual doctor's appointment or whatever, and they would ask about like, do you smoke cigarettes? And I'm like, well, then, and I would go to my whole thing, and she's like, so yes. And I'm like, but I never had this identity as a smoker. I would have never told somebody like, oh, I'm a smoker. So in my mid 20s, I had started dating Brian, my now husband, and it was kind of like the same pattern. It was significantly less, but there was a night we had come home from a date. We were sitting on my patio, poured a glass, we had a drink, we're sitting on the patio, and I smoked a cigarette. And I really, 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 really liked him. And we're sitting there, and he says, I don't want to date a smoker.
Oh my gosh, I don't know this story.
And it was done. I was like, put it out, done.
Isn't
And
that something?
because, well, I mean, clearly in that case, I mean, it meant so much. Well, first of all, I knew that was more in alignment with who I was. And then to have somebody like be so crystal clear, he wasn't threatening or anything about it. He's just like, I don't want to be a smoker. And I was like, okay. So quitting smoking was, obviously something that,
Right.
really beneficial, ultimately for my health and all of that kind of stuff, my marriage. And then over the last couple of months, I've quit drinking. And I don't think this is necessarily like a lifetime thing, but I am taking a significant break because it just affects my sleep so much. Was telling somebody, I was like, God, drinking a couple glasses of wine every night makes me like, I don't know, fat, dumb, and angry. So, and I'm like, those are things that I don't want. So, and I feel so much better. So there are things that we can struggle to quit. And because I would not say that was easy. There is definitely a habit there of just ending my work day, kind of transitioning into like making dinner, getting ready for the evening with the kids and whatever, where I would pour a glass of wine. So, um, but quitting that it wasn't straightforward. It wasn't just like a single day I decided and then it was done. It was kind of a process. So I feel like there are things in this category of quitting that we very much want to quit, but may struggle to let go for maybe for addictive reasons or for, conditioning or habits or anything else. Do you have anything
Yeah.
like that
I,
that's like
yeah.
something you want to quit?
Yeah, I mean, it's when you what you described was funny because because it's this idea of like the things we quit as we like know better and want to do better, right? And so when I was talking with my husband earlier, as I shared about like this the topic for today and like what are some things you quit? My husband is like he's sort of one of these biohackers, right? He's always like he
Oh,
wants just
yeah,
like
he
you,
totally
right?
is.
Right? He
Yeah.
wants to live forever and he wants to like only do things and consume things and live in such a way that will increase his longevity. And what that has meant over the last number of years is that he's always sort of tweaking it. And it's because, so it's like he quit any artificial sweeteners and sugars, right? So, so first it was like, we're not going to have sugar. We're going to have, we'll have Splenda. Then Splenda was bad. Now we're going to have stevia. Now we're not having stevia. Now there's no artificial, right? We as in air quotes, because I do not follow all of these things.
Right.
But then it was also around alcohol. It was like, you know, now he doesn't have consume any alcohol. And I love a glass of wine with dinner when we're out. And so, but this idea of like, I think when you know better, you do better. And so to me, like we should all be in a place where we quit the things that no longer serve who we're trying to become. And so it's funny because now that you're describing that in that way, I don't think of any of those things as quitting. And yet they are arguably by definition quitting. I think of them as like abandoning things that no longer help me become who I want to be. And so that goes back to your question at the beginning, like, quitting is a dirty word. Maybe we just need to say letting go of things that no longer serve me. And we
Yeah.
should all encourage that. Um,
Yeah, yes,
yeah.
which brings me to kind of a word that I like to use, and I think letting go of something is perfect. The the word that comes to mind for me is complete.
Mm,
So this part of my life, this relationship, this job, my work here is complete.
mm,
And so that kind of frees me up, like I'm done. And you know how we both love checking a box. So when I can
mhm.
call something complete, it it frees up some space to be open to what's next and not carry all this negative bias with all the connotation that we have around that word quitting. So that's what I would offer to is like, what can you call complete? Just call it done. I am absolutely done with cigarettes. I've been for the last 20 years. Not done, maybe not done forever with the triathlon stuff, but where can you call things in your life complete to free up some brain space for whatever might be next and more aligned with your goals?
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's such I think what we're all looking for at the end of the day is permission. Some of us need to give ourselves that permission. Some of us are looking for permission from others. Some of us are sort of having to reorganize who we think we are or who we want to be. But I think also being generous with yourself and giving yourself permission to stop doing things that you don't think serve you is something I think we probably all should do a bit more.
Yeah, I love that. So maybe on that note, let's bring some completion or some closure to this week's call. And you may have noticed if you are following along in a sequential way, you might say, "Wait a second. Last time you
Right.
guys said you guys were going to talk about what was it?
Making room for people to be who they
Oh,
are.
yeah, making room for people to be who are. That's
Not
obviously not at all what we talked about today, but we will talk about it next time, right?
Yes, we will talk about it next time. This was a result of me not scrolling all the way down in our planning document. So we missed this topic. But yes,
Yeah,
we're going
yeah,
to
but
talk about sort of this idea of, how we grow and how we love people and how we support people without being in charge of who they are.
yes, I love it. I cannot wait for that one. But this one was fun too. So as always, thank you so much. We would love to hear from you if you're enjoying these episodes or you have anything that you want to throw out there to hear us talk about, because we really love doing them. And so I think until next week, thank you all.
Thanks. Take
Thanks,
care.
Sarah. Okay, bye.